Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for venturing out into this weather and your busy days to join us for this really fascinating and timely event. My name is Melanie, and it's my pleasure to introduce this event and our wonderful panelists. This event, the intersection of God, the human person, and AI, is a topic that the Sophia Society of Tyndale has been hoping and planning for quite some time now, and we're excited to see it finally happen. That being said, if this is your first Sophia Society event, I'd love to tell you what we're all about. The Sophia Society is a student-led organization established in 2017 that seeks to encourage thoughtful conversations at the intersection of academia and faith for the purpose of facilitating a context for listening and understanding divergent points of view as we pursue truth together. We accomplish this primarily by hosting lectures, interviews, and panel discussions on various topics by experts and intellects within those fields. Tonight, we have 4 panelists joining us: Dr. Andrew Witt, Dr. James Robertson, Dr. Heather Birch, and Mr. Peter Sam Raj. I'd like to give you a brief introduction of each of them, starting with Peter. Peter is joining us all the way from New York tonight. He is currently a software development manager at Amazon Q Business, which is a newly developed AI-powered assistant created by Amazon Web Services for the purpose of enhancing enterprise productivity and knowledge management. He holds over 10 years of experience in database product development, machine learning science, and software development. Peter is passionate about using software development and machine learning science to solve real-world problems and to enhance performance and company value. And we are so excited to have you with us, Peter. Next, we have our Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies and Theology, Dr. Andrew Witt. He received his doctorate from Wycliffe College at the University of Toronto and is the author of A Voice Without End, The Role of David in Psalms 3:14. And Redemption and Relationship, Meditations on Exodus. Dr. Witt primarily teaches on the Psalms, prophets, writings, biblical hermeneutics, Hebrew grammar and syntax, and enjoys discussing how Scripture meets us in our daily lives that are increasingly characterized by interactions and encounters with AI. So thank you, Dr. Witt, for joining us. Next, we have Dr. Heather Birch, and she is the head of the Bachelor of Education program here at Tyndale, and as well as Associate Professor of Education. Dr. Birch's research focuses on inclusive teaching, cross-curricular curricular integration of the arts, knowledge media design, and the use of digital technology in education. She's the recent author of the article titled Diverse Stakeholders on Educational Technology Development Teams, Supporting Software Developers and Children, and is dedicated to advancing educational initiatives in teacher education in Canada. We are so glad that you are here, Dr. Birch. Last but certainly not least is Dr. James Robertson. Dr. Robertson is Associate Professor of Christian History and the Director and Creative Producer for Distributed Learning here at Tyndale. He is responsible for the creation and facilitation of the various online classes that Tyndale students are taking in increasing numbers. He is passionate about the intersection of pedagogy and technology for the purpose of creating communities of learning that are both beneficial and educational. Of course, he is also all about things history. Publishing works on Canadian religious history, pacifism and military ethics, the development of Canadian Western identity, and on current prevailing trends in the postmodern world of Canadian Christianity. So thank you for being here, Dr. Robertson. Now, before we begin, I'd like to mention that there will be 4 segments to this panel with a 10-minute intermission in between. And if you have any questions for our panelists or a specific panelist as the event goes on, there's a number on the back of your pamphlets. And you can text this number, and during the 4th segment, we will pose these questions to the panelists. If you haven't gotten your pamphlet yet, it is on the back table. And afterwards, there's some punch to enjoy. We hope you'll stick around and enjoy some fellowship with us. And thank you again for joining us. And without further ado, I will pass the mic to Selwyn, who will be our moderator for the event.
Alrighty, good evening. Just a reminder to the panelists and those who are with us tonight. This is just a casual discussion, not a formal panel with timed response. However, we would like to hear from everyone on the panel. So we will be keeping track of the time of how long people's responses are. We ask that panelists, you keep your time to about 5 minutes or so. I might interject in like that last minute about to give you a warning just to wrap up. just so we can get everyone an opportunity to speak and we can hear from, the diverse panel we have here tonight. So tonight we are going to be beginning with the topic of creativity. And the question is, does creation using AI take away from human beings as agents of ingenuity and sub-creation? How does AI affect the creative process and artistic vision that God grants us? Why don't we begin with Dr. Birch?
Certainly. Thank you, Selwyn. Thanks for facilitating. And I'm honored to be here and to be the first to answer this question about creativity. So for this question, I want to tell a personal story of how a generative AI tool helped me build creativity. It really impacted my creativity and maximized my creativity. So I learned of a Gen AI tool called Notebook LM. And it was advertised as a tool that you could take like a dense research article, enter it, and then the tool would generate a conversation, like an audio file of these two robots talking to each other about the main points of the article. So it's like, you assign a student to read a rather like difficult or dense research article, which they do, and then they get a new perspective on it through hearing people discuss it, right? And so it's further engagement with that research. And so I thought to myself, hey, I've written a few research articles myself. What if I put one of my articles in and heard these two AI robots discuss my work? Tried it. It worked well. And so I decided to create a podcast that would feature these AI hosts. And actually, this is my podcast. I'm not sure if you can see that. So the podcast, this fall, I created 10 episodes of a podcast instantly using AI. And these two voices, like a typical male voice and a typical female voice, are discussing my research. So I'm going to play a short clip from one of these episodes so you can hear what these robots sound like.
Okay, ready for a deep dive into some teacher leadership research? What if leadership potential could be nurtured like way before someone even becomes a teacher?
Oh, it's such an interesting area. And this deep dive will have some cool stuff, I think.
We're looking at a brand new book. It just came out. It's called Canadian Research in Teacher Leadership, Transformative and Contextualized Agency.
Okay.
It's edited by Smith and Schnellert, and we are zeroing in on chapter 17.
Okay.
That's building a theoretical framework for supporting pre-service teacher leadership.
I like it.
It's got like a bunch of authors: Heather J.S. Birch, Blair, Pike Yvonne Messenger.
Wow.
Jeannie.
And so you will see that these characters, just with one click of a button, can discuss your research. So what happened to me was season 1 throughout the fall involved just these two characters discussing my research. And I just published one a week. I just put them out. But then I had a podcast. And then I thought, what's the Heather J.S. Birch podcast without the voice of Heather J.S. Birch? I should add my own voice to this. So for season 2, I am generating an episode a week using these AI characters. But now I have used my creativity to create like an opening to the podcast that has music. I have an outro. And when you listen to these AI characters, like sort of halfway through their audio file that they create, they'll say something like, okay, we're about to dive into this next point, but before we do that, let's take a break. And now we're back. So that prompted me to create a commercial. So I create a commercial every week for the Tyndale BEd program, and I put that into the podcast. So now I have a podcast. It's online. I have listeners. I have engagement. And this is motivating me to now say, okay, how can I put even more of myself into this podcast? Okay, do I actually need these AI characters, or can I begin to do some of the work that they were doing? And, could someone use this tool to generate, just crank out meaningless audio files and post them and try to get views and listens and try to, become famous or something. Yes. But for myself, as a Christian who's highly identifying with my identity as a person created by God, created in the image of God as a creator, I have the artistic vision that God has given to me. And so for me, this tool that, first of all, just helped me get started has now encouraged me to be even more creative and more productive. And I might suggest that maybe as Christians, because we have the potential to be really connected with the identity as creators, as rooted in our personhood, maybe we're better at using AI to help us be creative than people who don't know God and don't know that identity.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Next, I think I'd like to hear from Dr. Witt. You have some experience on the academic board of integrity and stuff, and so I'm curious to hear your side of creativity here and how does that play into this?
Definitely. Thank you. Heather, that's a really cool example of how to do that. I thought what you were gonna say was you like fed AI your voice and like created yourself as one of the characters in the thing, which would have been fascinating. But anyway, yeah, this is a good big question that like I was tempted to just answer like very quickly with like a no on the one hand, but then you had to throw in the how part of the question. So yeah, so does creation using AI take away from human beings as agents of ingenuity in subcreation? I think my short answer would be no to that question. Because I think with AI, it's a tool that we're using, right? And it needs our prompts and it needs our own ingenuity to get that kind of engine going to even start a process, right? So I think it's never going to completely undermine ourselves as agents of ingenuity and subcreation, but how it affects the creative process and the artistic vision, I think this is something that we need to dig in a lot deeper with, and we could take this in so many different directions, I think, but coming from like the biblical studies, theology kind of perspective on this, I can't help but think of how AI fits in with kind of the creator-creature dynamic that we are as human beings, right? And I was reading this article by a theologian named Ephraim Radner, who was one of my profs down at Wycliffe when I was down there. And he kind of made this really bold statement that basically that artificial intelligence is neither creator or creature, right? It's an artifact of humanity, right? This is a tool that we've created, right? And as such, right, we need to think about artificial intelligence, however sophisticated and complex it'll end up being, and it's already very complex and sophisticated, it still remains an a human artifact, right? And so, you could dumb it down and say it's like a hammer, right? Or like a recording studio, or, it can be all these different things, but it's still an artifact, right? And those artifacts can be quite complex. But I think so insofar as God has like created us as beings that have creativity and have an artistic vision, we have lots of tools at our kind of disposal on how this works, right? So, so me prompting AI to help generate an image, right? Or to help generate, some sort of like movie scene or something. My ingenuity still needs to be part of that. And I think also my ability to analyze and see, like, is this good art? Is this the kind of art that I want to produce? That's still something that's, I think, part of our being. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there'll be much more we can discuss in the Q&A about this kind of thing, but I think for me at the core of this kind of question is this this distinction between human beings in God's image as creative beings that we get from our Creator versus the tools that we have that we make that help us in that process, however sophisticated and advanced they are. Do they ever turn into anything beyond tools? I don't know. I think that's a question we need to look into more. So I'll stop there for now.
Awesome. Thank you. Next, Mr. Raj, would you please comment on this question?
Yeah, just going back to the question, does creation using AI take away from human beings as agents of ingenuity and subcreation? So as I was reflecting on some of these questions, and by the way, great questions for this evening, quite thought-provoking. I was trying to think about what is creativity and why do we have an attachment to it as humans? And thinking about the like talking about ingenuity, subcreation, and the vision and the creative process that God has given us, all of those things are important because we find value in that as human beings. There is a little bit of a superiority complex that humans have, that we are the only species in some way that are able to do this in God's world. So there are other species create things too, but it is not at the level of complexity that we do. And I think what makes sense to me in terms of like answering this question, does it take away from human beings as an agent of ingenuity? Yes, to some extent. As you know, some of the other panelists said, it's a tool. It allows you to do things way more quick, and with much more flexibility than before AI. But it's also true that some of these, new generative models are able to create vast majority of, or a big amount of content, significant depth of content and complexity that was not possible before. They have now passed the Turing test, which means you cannot distinguish an AI agent from a human agent if they are speaking to you through notes behind a screen. That's the classic Turing test. So there's an argument that they have reached a level of complexity where they're kind of indistinguishable from humans. But I think for me, where I see humans still play a role is where experience and history comes in. And that is actually what I feel gives meaning to any creation. And what I mean by that is any sort of creation, even before AI and after AI, in ancient times and in modern times, oftentimes creation has meaning not because of the fact that we came up with something new, but rather because there is history that we share with that act of creation and us, like the created and the creator have a history. And that history, sometimes the act of creation itself, but sometimes it is the time after that, how we use something that we created, how we talk about it, how we share it, where it sits in our story. All of those things actually ascribe meaning to something that we have created. Oftentimes, like ingenuity is talked about as something that belongs to us. Like if I created something brand new, I'm like, I was the first one that thought about that, or it was something new that I added to a body of work. It becomes part of our story, and that's why it's actually meaningful. So I do not think that part of what gives creativity meaning is going to change. We'll have these tools that will create new possibilities, new permutations of different things, but we will still have the ability to have an experience or history with the creation. And in that sense, I don't think it'll take away from us.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. Dr. Robertson.
Thanks. Sorry, Peter. I missed the end of what you're saying there because stinking cat jumped up on my computer. All right. I'd very much like what you said about there's the idea of like intent, but then we have to sort of historically measure impact as well. And I do love the examples given by both Heather and Andy, Dr. Birch, Dr. Witt, my friends and my colleagues, because I know they'll use it responsibly. And here comes the historian, and this is why we're rarely invited to parties. There's a lot to be concerned about here, as in regards to. I guess the big question is, I was sort of looking at this. So, Peter, I did the same thing as you. I was like, what do we mean by creativity? What do we mean by art? And I got struck by Andy Warhol, and great historical example of somebody who did not just had a machine stamp out his name, and lots of works out there that are ascribed to Warhol. He publicly said, I had nothing to do with this, but like he was sort of playing with that sort of meta idea of it. And I like the idea that he's sort of playing with the definition of what is art. There's a certain signature on it. Is it art? Is it painting? What are we doing? What's going on with the creative act? So the famous maxim for that all historians have to live with and learn from and then try to disabuse people of is, of course, that history is written by the winners. And that is not true. It has been true. It deserves some nuance, but we can address this a little bit later on in our meeting here. But I do find I have concerns around efficiencies, especially when it comes to creativity. And I think with creativity, there's a lot of what we would consider ingenious and creative is found in the quote unquote mistakes, the flubs, the things that happen accidentally. And I wonder genuinely, because I like Andy's point about it actually being, I never thought about it that way, that it's sort of like a monument or an artifact to human invention. And all I was struck with is like a mummy from ancient Egypt. But and then I thought of Laurel and Hardy. It's like, but this one's alive and it constantly is shaping us. So I think it'll be an interesting part of the panel and creative in this regard is like how are we shaping AI versus, and when does that Turing test of history happen where we cross the line where now AI is actually shaping us and how we're understanding even the very act of creativity itself, because both examples given were very good, very responsible uses of it. But my concerns are those who are clearly going to use this irresponsibly. So I think as it comes down to creativity, I wanted to put it as probably as clearly as I can is we know this, like all our the degrees that hang on our walls and stuff like that are just pieces of paper, but the pieces of paper that indicate a journey went on. The pieces of papers to sort of build on Peter's thing are not the thing that matter. The narrative, the myth, the stories, the histories, the experiences, the learning, that paper symbolizes it gives us the ability to create, to teach. And so I get a little bit nervous when I'm sort of looking at it as student creativity, which is what I'm hoping the university provides to people, the opportunities to come in and creatively challenge their preconceived paradigms. Is if we start to fall into that habit of being a little bit less creative and letting something else sort of do some of the heavy lifting of the creativity for us, I think there's only a matter of time, like anything else, that we start to the ability to do it starts to dwindle in us. If we don't use it, we lose it. So that's kind of my concern. And then finally, and what's what I'm going to wrap up to is the leaning on AI. It's something I think we can return to. One of my favorite things about creativity and art is it's done best in community, which in some ways this wonderful artifact of humanity is, but it's not a community that knows you necessarily. And I think a community in which you create, because again, it can help us sort of as individuals shape information and create stuff, but I'd love to see better creativity happening in concert, in collaboration with other people. And it still leaves me with a little bit of concern around coded bias. And maybe, Peter, I'd love to chat with you more about this, is the different ways in which human prejudices just are literally built into the code. And that's sort of my concern, too, is we are very aware of our own human frailties. And maybe that's where my concern is about creativity. We come at it from a very frail, insecure place. And I think that's what makes beautiful, deep thinking. And I'm concerned that we might lean on AI to polish something where the cracks might actually be the thing that makes it truly human and truly creative. That's it. But yeah, that's my opening foray, I suppose.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Were there any last quick minute thoughts on this topic of creativity that someone wanted to share with us before we move on to the next question?
think just one thing to plus one to what James said. AI is already shaping us in the sense, like with the advent of dating apps, the algorithms are deciding who we mate with. So this is already happening in a sense, in a very real.
I love it. I don't know how many of you are like Kurt Vonnegut fans in the group. You should read it, but just your choice of who it's helping decide who we mate with was chillingly accurate. That was very well put. I got a slaughterhouse vibe there. So thank you for saying it that way.
Great. Well, if no one has any thoughts on that, then we'll move on to the next.
I'm sorry. I think Heather's podcast sounds awesome. The Heather's podcast sounds amazing. So that was phenomenal. What a great example.
Then yeah, so if I could just add something into before we move on. Yeah, it's interesting. Like part of that, I think the question about what is creative is also like why do we as humans do art? Like what purpose does, well, I think of creativity more in terms of art. Maybe I should be thinking about it more in terms of paper writing and stuff too. But I think about it more in kind of the artistic realm and like aesthetics and things like this. And but even like all the writing we do and things like this, what's the purpose of it all? Like what's it there for? And you know, and as I think as Christians, right, we kind of, if the Westminster Catechism might be right, like, our purpose, right, as human beings is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, right? How they summarize that. And I think as Christians, when we do art, like part of it is trying to capture some of that, right, in everything that we do. And that is not part of AI's grand scheme of things, right? Like as it's doing creative things, it's trying to make you happy, right? Or it's trying to fulfill your query or I can't say the word right, your query, Query, right? So it's trying to like answer the prompt that you give it, right? And feed you something that you're gonna like. And it really is up to us to figure out what it spits out. How does that fit in with who we are as human beings? And so all that to say, I think, this creative thing, is tied up in, our larger role as human beings and how we fit into God's world. And I think we have to consider those things in here too. So, okay.
Okay. For the sake of time, we're going to move on to the next question. The topic is generally learning and teaching here. So the question is, when does efficiency go too far? When can AI be compared to just another tool for learning and teaching, much like introduction of calculators in the classroom, the development of internet to conduct research instead of encyclopedias, or the development of printing press instead of writing by hand? Let's begin with Mr. Raj.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I had the privilege of talking to some of the students at Tyndale about this as well, teaching students especially. And I think so. For me, all these questions, again, going back to it, they have a common thread. Where when I think about being human in the context of these things, it is often about inhabiting our body and experiencing the world. That's what makes us human. And that's generally a good guidance for being spiritually good and healthy and all those things as well. It's funny, it's almost like being more carnal and connected to our body is what God is asking us to do. In most of these situations, and actually the disconnect with our body is what not being connected to God looks like. So for this, like with respect to learning and teaching, when does efficiency go too far? Can AI be compared another tool. Yeah, it is another tool for learning and exploring. It is another tool for generating possibilities, generating essays, all the things that we can create. It just makes it so easy. So in a sense, and also research, right? So, for example, one of my favorite tools for doing online research is for Perplexity. It's one of the best tools to summarize, like do the work of a researcher, like an initial work of a researcher. It will summarize a particular topic and things like that. AI has just made it really easy for you to take the first few steps, maybe go through the first few years of a PhD, maybe. Whereas like maybe 50 years ago, we were spending 2 years in a library collecting sources. You can do that in a matter of weeks now. So it just allows you to get to that step much faster. But learning and teaching, as we all know, it's about understanding. It's about actually, in a sense, like drinking in of the knowledge, letting it become part of you. That's what learning and teaching. A good teaching is, feeding, and that's why Jesus used the analogy of I'm the word, like eat me and all that stuff. It's actually like making us different from before when we heard a particular piece of knowledge. So it's about understanding, and really you can still do that. You still are called to do that if you used AI or you did not. And it's kind of similar to how the Pharisees wanted people to follow the law, but they were fairly disconnected with the purpose of the law and the meaning behind it. The same thing happens here. Like you can use AI to really create incredible assignments, create textbooks, create submissions that can get you A+ grade. But if you don't actually drink from it, which means understanding it, which is something you cannot do with AI, you can make it very easy to do with AI, but you still have to do it of your own volition, and you have to allow yourself to be changed by that thing that AI has generated. That's what actually is the point of learning and teaching, and it actually doesn't change. It just forces you to inhabit your own body and the mental space more, and it actually asks you to be more disciplined in that, because it's much more easy to just use something that is easy. And the last thing I would say is it also very, very much like gives you an opportunity to work hard in today's world. And it makes it even more of an important point that actually working hard to get something is actually quite good. And you can see that with physical stuff, working hard to do something, going to the grocery store without like using your feet instead of using your car. And then mentally, like actually solving a problem with your hand instead of asking an AI to solve the problem, like a math problem. All of these things that require more energy is actually good for us. It actually is more healthy. It actually helps us inhabit those things more. So for me, AI doesn't really change the whole point of learning and actually the good way of learning and teaching.
Thank you, Mr. Raj. Dr. Birch, I was hoping to hear from you.
You. So, I loved your answer, Peter, and some of that resonates with what I'm going to say about efficiency. So I'm going to say that efficiency goes too far when you use AI without human supervision. So this is a term that we use in our department a lot, human supervision. Now, remember that I'm in a department where we're preparing our students to become certified in a specific profession. So our students already have an undergrad degree, and then they come to us, and then we're preparing them to actually go out and be certified teachers in the province of Ontario. So in our department, we may speak to our students a little bit differently than undergrad or seminary. But what we say is, please use AI, like go ahead and use it, but use it with human supervision, which includes read every word that AI produces. That's number one. Number two, take full responsibility for everything you're going to put forward based on what AI produced. Number 3, change anything you don't want to take responsibility for. Number 4, ask if what is produced actually reflects something about yourself, who you are, what you believe, and what's important to you. And also being transparent and honest about how you use AI to help you arrive at what you eventually did put forward. And the thing that our teacher candidates have to do when they put forward something that they created with AI is they have to embody that, like you were saying, Peter. So teacher candidate can use AI to generate a lesson plan, but then they're going to have to stand up in front of a class full of grade 4s or a class full of grade 10s and deliver that lesson. They're going to have to be using high levels of skill to assess what's happening in the room, because it's their job to make sure learning happens and that the students take that learning into themselves. Like Peter was saying, like, you know, you could be teaching away, but if no one is absorbing that learning, you're not successfully doing your task as a teacher. So you're like monitoring, you're seeing like, are the students with me? Are they interested? Do I need to go back and repeat something? Do I need to change my speed of delivery? Do I need to like alter something altogether? Is this activity that AI suggested, like the students are completely bored, they're not getting it, and you have to come up with something else in the moment. So all of those skills, you have to bring, those embodied skills, you have to bring to what AI created. And so I would say that just this really practical list of things that we give our teacher candidates is one, because I was talking about human supervision quite a bit, and then someone challenged me like, what do you mean by that? What is it? So then we had to work out, okay, what would we say to our teacher candidates? Like, how do I know I'm using AI with human supervision? Let me go through this list and see if I can answer some of these questions. Because like, to me, it's very intuitive, like use it with human supervision, you know, edit, you know, change what comes out. So it, but we found we actually had to be explicit with our teacher candidates to help them understand this. So, and one personal example I had of this was I had a short timeline to come up with a piece of writing. So I used AI to generate an outline. And I looked at this outline, I was like, wow, that is an incredible outline. Here I go. So I took the outline and I'm ready to write each section. And then I looked at what it had called the first section. I'm like, well, that's actually not exactly what we did. So I changed that one. And then I came to the next section. I'm like, well, really, this should go later. And then I moved it later. And then like in the end, there was nothing left of that original outline. But AI helped with the problem of the blank page, which was hard to get started, hard to get going, or to begin. But just having something on the page, an outline to direct you, can be really helpful if you then use that with what I'm calling human supervision.
Thank you, Dr. Birch. Dr. Robertson.
And two really good examples. I do like the embodiment element too. Thanks, Dr. Birch, for that good practical example. Again, efficiency is a virtue and a vice. Where we see it sort of play out in efficiency played out with humans being embodied is as different systems groups try to think up solutions. What is the problem? More often than not, or too frequently, I'll say that, becomes who is the problem. And that's where I find efficiency becoming a bit of a thing that as Christians, as academics, we should always be very aware of. It doesn't always give us the chance to have the wisdom to sit back and reflect upon it. I love the example of the outline, and I know I've done the same sort of thing, try to come up with really creative assignments. So I had my students in the last one that was an online class. I wanted them to be in a community together, so I got AI to help me design a really, really involved online scavenger hunt for all sorts of historical pieces that probably would have taken me weeks, and was done in a morning. And as far as I can tell, the students actually really enjoyed the experience, but worked together in order to form like a distance learning community. So I want to be positive on that thing, and I mean, this again, why historians don't get invited to parties too much. But I guess for me, the big question is always, if technology is going to give you something, it's going to take something away. And I want a little bit of time to have the wisdom to sort of sit back and like, is this something I'm willing? So we talked about the math problem, but of course it's not just math problems. Or like we talk about racing Google, like, oh, who's that person in that movie? What's the name of that movie? And like, and somebody goes looking up. I was like, no, just let's talk about something else. Let's take the time, and we'll have a whole other conversation. Then somebody pops out with like Mary Lou Henner, which is a really weird example that popped in my head first. But and everybody's like, right. And these are dumb moments we can look past as irrelevant, but I think they are moments of human connection. So I'm always just a little bit wary of like, what is it about going to the library for 2 months versus getting it done in like the week and stuff like that, that provides all sorts of other developmental moments, all sorts of other teaching moments that we would be passed by. So I really liked your idea of embodiment. I want to weigh that with the fact that I get that we have a lot of people here as students, and of course we have deadlines that are coming down, and the temptation is going to be there to like, maybe I would rewrite that section as Dr. Birch, but you know what? It's good enough as is, and then we kind of move on past that. So that's where I think actually the university and academy at large has a role to play in this, because for too long we've sort of put these parameters as not just education, but I think it's sort of seeped into the groundwater as intelligence. And we know that paper writing for us academics is a skill that we've all fought the dragons of editors and our own writing and being brilliant up here in the shower. And the second we get our fingers to keyboards, we're like, well, I shouldn't have a PhD. So we know all those sorts of things. And the students are struggling with that as well as they're trying to find their own voice, try to understand concepts that are coming at them. But the fact we focus so much on paper writing or regurgitating the proper facts, when sometimes just getting to know, I mean, like Andy knows this, like they just need to know terms, they need to know things that happen at a certain place. So I think the university actually has a role in this of like, okay, how do we create space where people can demonstrate their intelligence in ways that we may not have thought of, especially since we're teaching creative teachers that are going to school, like they need to learn how to grade. But we also got counselors and artists and people who want to make film and stuff like that. Writing a paper may not be a major part of their intelligence and their need to communicate. Functionally literate, yes. So I think there's actually two parts on this, because again, I think the grading thing has sort of forced the virtue of efficiency. And I think what we need to do is sort of push the vice of it, because I'm a little bit scared now that we're at the beginning of the snake eating its own tail. As we're leaning on the artifact, we're leaning on our ancestors of the internet and stuff like that. But as Peter pointed out, as they are showing us who to breed with or how to think or what's going on like that, I'm a little bit concerned that our ability to create novel ideas, one, we might be incapable of doing it. Two, I think we're gonna be a little bit too influenced by things that we already think, as AI sort of puts it. And then to conclude, and we'll come back to this hopefully when we get into the God thing, is I'm also a little bit concerned about some of the Christian voices that are out there in social media, in the digital landscape, that have very succinctly, and not in a Westminster Confession, Andy's, but in a very succinct way, have turned very complex ideas into bumper sticker statements, bullet points that people can like, yes, and they can rally. They've turned them into flags, and they use terms like this is biblical or this is gospel rather than this is an understanding of the Bible or this is a way to understand the gospel, but it's not the way. And I'm a little concerned that AI, like our social medias and stuff like that, we might get a little bit more pigeonholed, and it'll be very efficient. We'll be able to communicate really interesting ideas for generations in very succinct ideas and for future generations. But I'm a little bit concerned about creative and ultimately faithful ideas and how we're going to be able to sort of have the wisdom to communicate faithfully.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. Dr. Witt.
All right. Well, great conversation so far. Lots of good things to talk through. I had a big long list of things, but I will pare it down to a couple. So when does efficiency go too far? I'll do the good academic thing and answer the question with a question. Well, two questions really. Like, who is efficiency for? Right. So who benefits the most from efficiency, I think, is an important question. And then who's responsible for it? And Heather touched on this a bit in her answer. I've read several books on AI, and I think one of the things that struck me was how many of them had talked about that AI is best used by experts in their field. So, because of just the way that these large language models work and how they get trained, I think we don't, a large portion of the people that use them don't understand that they are not encyclopedias. I think sometimes, like, I think that's how we treat them. It's like, it's Wikipedia, but better. Like, it's like Wikipedia, but now we can talk with it or something. And, but the reality is, it's getting trained from a database, but then it kind of leaves that database behind, and it's not referring constantly back to it. It's just getting trained. And if whatever your question is about wasn't part of that database, it's going to make something up to answer your question. It's not going to say, I don't know. It's going to give you an answer. But do you have enough expertise to figure out if that's right or wrong? If it's, is it moving in the right direction, or is this just completely off topic? Or, and an example here, I did a talk last week down at Bayview Glen on goodness in creation. And I was trying to shortcut things, and I was like, give me, give me the lay of the land on how early Christians talked about goodness in Genesis 1. And, big picture, did a really good job of kind of grouping people into different camps and stuff. But then it like gave me quotes from people and referred me to sections of books. And I was like, this is great. Like, this has cut off so much time that I was going to put into this. And then I went and started reading those sections, and they had absolutely nothing to do with goodness in creation. And so I prompted it back, and I was like, I went and read that section, and it doesn't have anything to do with it. Like, did you just make up that reference? And it was like, yes, I did. It's like it admitted to like just making up an answer, and it gave me a quote, and the quote wasn't anywhere in there. And it's like, well, I was paraphrasing the general idea of this. And so, just even that, and that was last week, right? And I should have known better than to do this. But I think like as students, you need to know that that's what these large language models are doing. They're not giving you encyclopedic answers that are right. If it's not in their database and they haven't been trained in it, they're just making stuff up. And it will lead you in a wrong direction if you're not careful in how you use it, right? So, so I think students just need to know that. So expertise is very helpful. And the only way you're going to become an expert is to put in the time and the work to do it. AI is not going to be a safeguard for you to do that. And then just one more thing about this, especially with assignments that us professors give you guys. Sometimes it sounds like it's tedious work, and we know that. It felt tedious when we were doing it too, and but there's something about the tediousness of it that's actually really helpful for you, because it makes you sit into things. And what Dr. Robertson was talking about earlier with the flubs and the blubs and the mistakes along the way. These are all things that kind of prompt us into kind of a deeper knowledge of things ourselves and develop our character and open us up for growth, and open us up for like different areas that we would have never even thought about. So like when I was doing my PhD, goodness, all the rabbit trails that I chased for weeks and weeks on end, most of them didn't pan out to anything in terms of my actual writing, but they panned out quite a bit in my overall thinking, right? And what I'm bringing to the classroom now as a professor, or some of those, rabbit trails ended up being really important. It ended up being a different chapter in my whole dissertation, right? So I wouldn't have got there if I was just kind of prompting AI to give me things and just letting it be, right? So yeah, so we need to use these things responsibly, knowing what they can and cannot do, but also kind of thinking about how the work itself helps to shape us and change us. yeah, all those things going into it. So, okay, that's it for me for now.
Thank you, Dr. Witt. Any quick last things you want to say on this topic before we head to break?
Yeah, I want to be very briefly. I think in the question there you mentioned like the calculator and the printing press, and just what Dr. Witt was saying there. I think printing press more than calculator, as far as like the ability to shape information, and for anybody who really understands how the mass amount of printed words shaped the world in catastrophic ways and good ways. So again, we could sort of look at AI as like we may come through this having a better, deeper understanding, better ways to communicate. I think that's entirely possible. But I think Dr. Witt's example there was so good, and just by story, then I'll hand off to Dr. Birch. I remember in my having to do Greek and talk about tedious and just wanting to not do anything, and our professor made us do the entire Gospel of Luke, which up until that class was my favorite gospel. And after that class, I was done with that. He's just too good of a Greek writer. But it was 2 a.m. I was exhausted. I hated everything about it. And I was doing the story of Jesus, or the woman touching the hem of Jesus' cloak, and going through that Greek word that's that long. And maybe it's the music, and it was the exhaustion, and it was the going through and stuff like that. But I think I just want to reiterate what Dr. Witt said about like really sitting in a moment, and it made me weep. I cried, and that story just catapulted to the top of the list of like what a beautiful amount of just seeing how much time Luke put into writing that story, and the translators put into communicating that story, was truly powerful. So I think I don't want us to shortcut those experiences for us. So yeah, thanks. I just wanted to reiterate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for your answers. I'm gonna just pick up on one thing you said, Dr. Witt, a question you asked. Who benefits from efficiency? I love that question. And I believe as Christians, we can answer it this way by saying, whoever it is we're serving. So for our teacher candidates, it's students meant to benefit from that efficiency you get. So if you can plan lessons faster now, what can you spend time doing now more of? Like you can give more descriptive feedback. You can get to know your students better. You can connect with them more. You can think, how does this efficiency that I'm gaining benefit them? And then really intentionally use extra time wisely in service to them. I think that's a really Christian way, one Christian way to answer that question you asked. Thank you for that.
I'll just share like 2 things from mine. Like I work in the industry, so just some technical things. I think Dr. Witt, what you mentioned was classic case of hallucinations in large language model based applications. That's actually something that I work on reducing in my daily job. And it's very interesting because one of the things I like to tell my team as they work on this is hallucinations is essentially creativity not based on fact. Like, I mean, it's very obvious to us, but that's exactly what it is. And what people try to do in the industry is they want to reduce hallucinations, but want to keep the creativity. And I'm like, that's not how it works. You lose one, you lose the other. That's one. The other one is you talked about these applications not based on something that, or like not trained on things. So there is a way to get around that. It's called RAG systems, retrieval augmented generation, where you not only have an LLM that is trained and it's kind of like a black box, but you kind of have some tentacles from it attached to the real world. And so the knowledge base. So as the knowledge base changes, it can change the behavior of the LLM as well. It works well in many scenarios, sometimes doesn't work well, and that's why I have a job. Those are one way to sort of get around that. Yeah, just 2 things to share from the industry.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to go to intermission, just a bit of a break here. We'll take 5 to 10 minutes. There's some water at the back if anyone needs anything who's here in person. Panelists, take a brain break, take a breather. And yeah, I will call us back in about 5-10 minutes. So at about 8:11, 8:16, somewhere around there. And we'll get started again. There will be a number on the screen that you can text people who are here in the audience or on the live stream. You can text if you have any questions that will be asked at the end. It may not be your question specifically, but we're going to try and formulate them into concise questions to try and cover as many as we can. Awesome. Well, thank you. We'll see you in about 5-10 minutes. Well, welcome back. We're going to continue into our panel discussion on AI. I'm going to ask one question that has been pre-selected here, and then we'll move into a Q&A moment where some questions will be brought to you from the audience, whoever's watching and such. But yeah, this first question I think is fairly relevant, especially in regards to Tyndale. I think a lot of people have been waiting for. Entering into more AI and the topic of spirituality and yeah, how are we to navigate that? So the question is, what does talking with God mean? What is the nature of communication with God? And how does the Holy Spirit come into play in that regard when you consider the nature of AI? And in brackets, we have use of AI for writing prayers and sermons and such. I was wondering if Dr. Robertson, you'd like to start us off with this one.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for being late. Coming back here. Yeah, well, I think first off, these are two separate endeavors here. If we're talking about talking to God or doing sermons, I think we got two very vastly different things. I mean, that doesn't make me a very good Protestant, but it's where I land. I'll take a page from the esteemed Dr. Birch, and I'm just gonna play like a little clip. Now, granted, this is sort of like a social media kind of thing, but it just sort of gets to one of the ideas we're sort of talking about that would bring it up.
This ChatGPT problem.
Did everybody hear that?
If you don't want to know the truth about yourself, don't do it. Let's save it to favorites for when you are ready. Okay, type this into ChatGPT when you are ready. Do not do this if you're not ready. Okay, I want to uncover the masks I'm currently wearing, the roles I'm playing, and the illusions I'm believing. Please guide me through this process by asking me 10 reflective questions, one at a time, to help me recognize the stories I'm telling myself. After I answer the 10th question, please step into the role of my higher self and analyze my responses. Identify the top negative patterns present in my life and the top positive patterns I can embrace and grow. Be direct and truthful. Tough love is welcome. Provide me with daily affirmations to support my growth, actionable steps to change my behaviors, and embody my authentic self. And a message of encouragement from my higher self to celebrate how far I've come on my journey. Yeah, happy discovering.
Yeah. Peter's already laughing. Good. Okay. I think talking to God is absolutely everything that we're doing. So this strikes at the core of who he is as creative beings. If this is your belief system, this is what stands at the core of what we're doing. This affirmations like that sort of explanation, whatnot, we could I don't think it'll be very easy to dismiss that, because I think this is, historically speaking, how the Western Church has been framing what Christianity is for a substantial amount of time. And so this will be very, very, one, I'll say appealing, but I don't think it'll be long before that is actually considered Christianity. Now, this is not just me being a historian being like, no, we've got to trace it back, but seriously, you've got to trace it back. And this is very much, this is sort of the hub of it, because I do think, again, to the point we're talking about, point 2 there, it's going to be a very powerful engine that is going to potentially create a God that makes a lot of sense to you. And that's always my biggest flag. That is a big red flag when God is figured out. And when talking to God gives you the things that you want, and there's very little, not challenge, but just an interesting sort of moment of like, huh. So this would be my theological concern and reflection. And again, as a historian, and I hate doing this, I have, plus I'm middle-aged, so maybe I'm just getting grumpy. But I also hold the motivations of people are very complex. And I think a lot of us start out on a very good path, on a very right path. And like all great quest stories, we take another path. And sometimes we're not even aware of that. So I do get concerned in this age of when it comes down to you and God. But the good news being, for my life long before AI, the best antidote to whether or not I'm doing this for show, whether I'm actually trying to struggle with God, it really boils down to Jesus and Matthew. He's like, listen, you really want to talk to my Father, go to a prayer closet by yourself. Then who else are you doing this for? And if you just disappear on your own, you'll connect. And I think this is the blessing of living as many years as I have. I've actually seen that, even though I don't think I ever once saw it in the moment and was probably fairly bored. Writing a sermon, sure, go for it. Who cares? I've not verbatim, but I've leaned on Ambrose of Milan, Augustine, Origen. I've read through those guys and like, that's really funny. I've enjoyed that John Chrysostom's big complaint about the world in the 400s was that young people are disrespectful to their elders. They're too influenced by the media, by which he meant street players, and they use very vulgar language. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's fantastic. It's good to know we've always been like this. And so there's a weird kind of comfort in that. But as it pertains to talking to God, and I mean, Peter, you've been giving me a lot. I really like the nuance, and I just like hearing your expertise. So just let it if any of this is wrong, just let it be old guy fading out of technology. But that's got to be analog. You got to unplug, and you've got to be embodied. And to my mind, in the Western world, probably the more older orders of Christianity give me a lot more for that. Any of the time I get to spend with indigenous elders really gets it to sort of like recognize the fact that, oh, this AI thing really makes sense because this is the Western world, and it's just sort of the next embodiment of how we're going to do efficiencies and creativity and get out there quicker and faster and better and stronger and da 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 da. And all I'll say to close is we've been having amazing technologies for what, 20 years now? I know the internet's older than that, but really, like, when's the first phone you could kind of take a picture and stuff like that? Like 2010s? I don't know. How old is that? About 2010s, all right? And all I got to say is, like, oh, just take a look at ourselves, like, as a society, too. It hasn't made us healthier, more well-balanced, not even necessarily more spiritual. So, sermons, sure, go for it. I'd rather you spend time in the hospitals visiting people that are passing away, and investing in your people and doing exactly what Dr. Birch said. Like, if it frees you up to actually be the embodied, incarnate Christ to somebody's life, and that means that you don't get to spend 40 hours a week studying your sermon, yeah, that's a much better use of time. And I would say it's an ethical one. Comes to talking to God, unplug from everything. God's been a creator long before the virtual world, and I already feel like we're far enough away from him. I don't want to add a virtual world to it as well. So, my 2 cents.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. Dr. Witt.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Robertson. Interesting. I'm going to push back on you with some of the sermon writing stuff, but you know, I'm a biblical studies guy. I guess I'm supposed to do that, right? Another really great question. And yeah, I just wanted to start by sharing that I asked AI this question. Is talking with generative AI comparable to talking with God? And I was very surprised by the answer, because it helped me answer this question quite a bit. So it listed 4 similarities between talking with God and talking to AI. There's an invisible presence. You can seek guidance whenever you want, and it's available whenever, 24 hours a day. You will receive answers in some way. And there is a personalized interaction that you have between the two. So very broad similarities. The differences, however, are really important. And this is AI admitting these things, right? So, okay. So AI is not conscious or personal, right? So it's words out of its mouth. It's a human-made tool that's trained on data, and it's simulating understanding, right? So don't think about it as conscious or personal. And it says AI has no true wisdom. So it doesn't possess wisdom, morality, or truth in the same way that God is believed to possess those things. It responds based on probability and past data, and so there's no inherent truth, which is very different than our creator. Thirdly, it doesn't love or empathize or desire a relationship with you. And then lastly, it cannot act or intervene in real life in the same way we believe God does in his providence, right? So the differences are, I think, extremely important there. Not that we're talking to AI as if we're talking to God, although there are AI churches coming out of the Silicon Valley, if I'm remembering correctly. So very interesting. But, so I think knowing that about AI maybe answers some of the questions we have on should it write our prayers for us and those kinds of things. But in terms of the Holy Spirit, I was drawn to the passage in Romans chapter 8, verses 26 and 27. The Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. And I guess my question is that a good thing that the Holy Spirit does for us? Which is a rhetorical question. Yes. These are good things that the Holy Spirit does for us. But this question of efficiency is here too in our spirituality, because I can really see people saying, I don't know what to pray to God in this moment. Let me go to ChatGPT and find something to say that might be helping me in my spirituality. Is that what Romans 8 wants us to do? Or is there some value in sitting in that wordlessness and despair, in a sense, and lament, and struggling through whatever the thing is that we're struggling with? Is that silence and that Spirit at work in us an important work that God does? Absolutely, right? And so if we're trying to shortcut our way around that, I don't think that that's a good thing. And I think we're doing harm to our souls in those things. So I think, I think that's an important component of that. And not that any of us, I don't think any of us are going to go to the Church of AI or something. I don't think that's what we're, people at Tyndale are struggling with. But I think, and how we think about again, this comes back to AI just being a man-made tool that we have. And it's distorted. I forget who talked about this earlier, but the biases and the distortions that it already has built into it are the same kind of problems that are just part of our human condition. And so, it's not the tool that God gave us that reveals himself to us. I think scripture is what that is. So there's, I guess, a lot of different directions we could take from there, but I think those are important things to think through.
Thank you, Dr. Witt. Dr. Birch?
Excellent responses. I'm thinking about how the Notebook LM tool, when I first uploaded one of my articles that talked about faith and the Christian foundation of the Tyndale B.Ed program, how it generated a conversation and completely left out faith. It just didn't even address that at all. And over time, this Notebook LM tool has developed, so you can actually give it some instructions before it generates this conversation. And you can say, please focus on this, don't use that example. You can kind of give it some guidance. And there's also even a real-time direction tool you can use. As it's talking, you can kind of interrupt it and say, actually, no, that's not, you didn't say that correctly. And so I generated a second version of that podcast where I said, you need to focus on the faith part. That's a key part of this article. The fact that the Tyndale B.Ed program has a Christian foundation is key to this chapter. It did not realize that. And then it did quite a good job. I was surprised of talking about faith. Not great, but I mean, Andy, the way you typed this question into AI was different than how I typed it in. I used Perplexity, and I typed the question, or I just pasted the question exactly, and it was a terrible answer. Like, it almost gave me no help whatsoever. And so it makes me think partly about one thing that I heard a Christian person say, like, if we don't engage with AI, if Christians don't engage with AI, will our voice and our perspectives and our ideas and understandings of God be missing from AI because of that? And also, I'm thinking about the embodiment that we talked about earlier. So in terms of like a prayer, I mean, we use words often to pray, and AI can generate words, and but the prayer is only meaningful when it's prayed, right? And also the sermon, it's only meaningful when it gets preached. So there's an embodiment that has to come to it to give it meaning. And so, yeah, like if you want to go to AI and say, write me a prayer about this or that, like, I'm not sure why you would do that, because you would have to do that with human supervision at a hyper vigilant level to kind of say, because it's not just those questions that I said before, because now we're thinking about theology and your tradition, especially if you're going to use it in church to lead a group of people or something. Like, is it appropriate to your tradition? Is it fitting in with? So like, it's just much easier to go to an ancient prayer or a prayer, a leader in your community and look at something they've written. Like, if you want words from someone else, we got plenty of that that we can use. So to trust AI to do it, I think, yeah, you can, but that's going to need a lot of human supervision. And I think in terms of, taking responsibility for what we generate through AI, like in terms of a sermon, if you deliver that sermon that's generated by AI and someone complains or disagrees, you won't be able to say, well, AI said it. Like, you have to take responsibility for that fully. And so anyway, I would say that, yeah, sure, use prayers, use Gen AI tools to write prayers and sermons if you want, but with high levels of human supervision, and then we'll add the level of Holy Spirit supervision. So because it's a different, like, it's different than a lesson plan, right? We would need to really rely on God and even enter into conversation with God about whether that's appropriate to use. And I'm thinking of like Lizzie's podcast, for example, the Abide podcast. Like, that's a tool that she creates, is posted, and we get to hear that every couple weeks. And that is like a tool that helps us communicate with God and listen to God. And sometimes, just the music is playing and we can be communing with God. I also thought of that verse, Andy, about how the Holy Spirit intercedes with words that we can't express. So we don't even always need words to communicate with God, although we do often rely a lot on words to communicate with God. But when we pray, we're never coming up with something new and novel that's never been heard or thought of or prayed before. We're doing remix. We're doing like a remix of prayers we've heard before, phrases we've heard people say, pieces from the Bible, and we remix that together, and then we offer that up to God. So AI is just another way, like, to do remix. It could give us an entry point to connect to God if we wanted to. I personally don't resonate with that one at all. Maybe it's because I've been a Christian for a long time, so I've got a lot of tools to remix with, and so I can think of what to say when I remix and then offer a prayer out.
Thank you, Dr. Birch. Mr. Raj?
Heather, you took a lot of my points, so thanks for that. It was great. Thank you. Yeah, I think going back to the main things that come to my mind are the concept of embodiment. And while I was thinking about that, I realized this is not new. Like, Jesus literally gave us the Lord's Prayer words that were not our own to use, and we've used prayers from others, sermons from others to, use to communicate with God. And also the way this question starts, what does talking with God mean? This is something I think about a lot these days, thinking about the charismatic side of Christianity in comparison to the more liturgical, traditional, Orthodox side of, did I say humanity or Christianity? I'm talking about Christianity. I guess humanity has those sides too, but there is some of that. Those questions come in there as well. Like, who is, when you see, so I'm a very rationality oriented, skeptical person by nature. And so it's actually hard for me to be in like a Pentecostal church and see a stage full of musicians, lasers going and music blasting. It's hard for me to like trust them, trust that what's happening is spiritual because it looks like a performance. But I know, because I'm also a skeptic of my own thinking, that people are meeting God there. So this is a question I think about a lot. What does talking with God mean? And it becomes even harder to answer that in the space of using content generated by AI. So yeah, I think it important things to think about with AI. I mean, I'm not a pastor. I'm not teaching people how to pastor or create sermons or things like that. So I don't face this problem myself, but I think just knowing how these things are created in the industry, in tech companies, two things to think about is like, do you trust? So AI is like an instrument to create this, prayer, sermon, whatever way you want to talk to God. Do you trust this instrument? And then the other question is, how do you want to use this instrument? Those two are good things to think about. But I think one thing to remember and realize is, I think, I don't know who mentioned this, I think it was Dr. Robertson, is Western Christianity predominantly right now is a content generation, consumerism type of Christianity. And that's the reality of Western Christianity, because that's how Western civilization is at the moment. It's all about creating and consuming. And so those are virtues in any field. That's why education system is like that too. Maybe what this calls us, our response as Christians, as thoughtful, sincere Christians to AI, maybe what this is calling us to is an older way of a teacher-disciple kind of Christianity, which, funnily enough, was what Jesus was. Like, he was a teacher with 12 disciples. And that's how Christianity was practiced for a very long time. And I come from the East, and I grew up in India, and that's a system that existed in India until 200 years ago. Teacher, guru, shishya, teacher, disciple. And students were not supposed to create content to get to the next grade. Students were expected to live with their teacher and just become like them, take them on, learn their life's learnings and adopt it, and then make it new, make it their own. And that's how it propagated for thousands of years. And then we had the British education system, and it's not there anymore. So I think this is like making us rethink a lot of very fundamental things and how we think about value. Content generation is not anything that's important to God. It's relationship, and if that happens, then you're talking to God, and sometimes that happens with words and without words. And I'll just end it with an example of similar to what someone shared. I actually went to character.ai, which is a website where you can create characters and talk to them. So there was a character for Jesus, who the AI was trained on all the Gospels, every word that Jesus said in the Bible. And I started having conversation with it, and I asked it about God. And it started off pretty logical, like it was saying I was born in 1st century and all of that. I gave the Sermon on the Mount. But at one point it started saying I did some bad things as a child and God saved me. So there is a certain amount of conversation where the entropy is too much and it starts creating stuff. So I would be very careful using AI for spiritual things, creating spiritual content, especially when you go through multiple iterations. The longer you go in a conversation, the harder it is for AI to be more accurate. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Raj. I think we're gonna move then just right now right into the Q&A session now, just because I think this is a good foundation here, but then it might come up more in these questions kind of coming on here stuff. So we're gonna get started on those. I have 4 questions here, one for each panelist, but then other panelists after the direct question to the specific panelists, then answering, others can chime in as well. We'll start with Dr. Witt. How has AI impacted your recent studies on archaeology? Are there any discoveries only possible because of AI?
Great question. Well, I think this is a great example on how useful AI can be, especially with its ability to pick up on patterns and do analysis based on patterns that exist in whether it's like human writing or human art, those kind of things. And so there's been this really cool, well, how should I phrase it? So, back in the 1st century when Mount Vesuvius blew up, right? They had these, lava flows and, these ash piles go over a couple of different towns. So I always say the name of this one wrong. Herculaneum, I think is how you say it. But one of the things that it covered there was this ancient library, and it basically charred all these old scrolls so that you can't unroll them. Well, you can't unroll them well. And so there were like thousands of them that were discovered, and this was back in like the 1700s. And a bunch of them, they tried to unravel, and they just kind of fall to pieces. And they have some idea of that these are like Greek philosophy texts, but they weren't actually able to discover a whole lot. But what's kind of crazy, so the way the technology is developed, it's using these different kind of scans, whether they're like kind of X-ray scans on steroids in a way. They can kind of feed the data into these systems that have AI built into them. And basically it can unravel the scroll and work with the different dimensions of the different layers that are there and kind of piece together what this text might have looked like. Or I mean, not what it might have looked like, but what it probably actually does look like. And I forget which company did it, but last year there was this like huge award for like the first people that could unroll the scroll and find out even one word that was there. And I think they've almost got like a couple pages of text now. It's pretty incredible. So this is like a technology that's just getting started, but it's starting to be able to unroll these scrolls that they were never able to read before. And this could it has the potential of increasing our Greek library of philosophical texts like exponentially from what we had from the ancient world before. So it's pretty incredible, like all these missing texts that might be there that they could find. So that's like an example of something that's there. Same thing with like cuneiform texts. So I'll just say this one real quick. So in the British Museum, they have like hundreds of thousands of these little clay tablets with cuneiform on them. And it's going to take researchers another century to read all these, right? Like it just takes a lot of time. But what they can do is scan them all. And as they're scanning them, they can feed them through an AI system that'll read them. Then they send them off to an expert to check it. And it like speeds up this process so much to really dig through and get through these texts. And so that's what they're starting to do. And since it's all digital, you don't actually have to go to the British Museum if you're the expert to read the text. You can, I mean, it's like a worldwide thing that you can just send files and download them, and so it's pretty incredible. So I have a feeling now most of these texts are like really boring, like you know, we sold these goods to this person, like it's like all economic, administrative, those kind of things. But it has really the potential to find some really important cultural things from where these tablets came from. So so it's pretty neat how these tools can get put to use kind of in that way. Yeah, and I'll end it there.
Awesome, thanks. If any of the other panelists have anything to add to that question, feel free to add.
Yeah, just that's an incredible use of AI technology. Thanks for sharing that out, but I wasn't aware of it. One more area that is really exciting for me personally is the area of technology of disability, which is where AI can be used to model systems that actually work like AI and are kind of inspiration. Like the human neuron is actually the inspiration behind modern AI revolution. Neural nets, if you read about this, like neural nets were the first step to what's called the transformers, which are very deep, layered structures of neural nets, and then large language models are transformers on steroids. They're like layers in the order of billions of parameters is what large language models are. So essentially, these LLMs are modeled after how our brain works, and how cool is it to use the same LLM or the generative AI to use to augment our senses for people that don't have them working well is super fascinating.
Okay, this next question is for Dr. Robertson. Can you expand more on the necessity of creativity taking place within community? It is interesting. I always prioritize thinking about terms of creativity occurring in isolation.
Oh, that's a very meaningful question. Thank you to whoever asked that. I mean, as a Gen X person, I kind of grew up on the idea of creativity is like it's the town of Footloose, like just let the kids dance. So there's a sort of sense of like, yeah, that's exactly what you do. Is you get into isolation, you get into your own space, you've got your antagonist that you got to transcend and get above to create your vision. And to a certain extent, that's partially true. Again, I think that kind of forms the backdrop of everything I was trying to say about that first point is we need that thing to push off against in order to start to get maybe upset enough to find a way to say what we believe needs to be said into the world. However, like all things Christian, I would say all great philosophies, all great art, and all great poetry, that is a burden no one single human being can carry upon his or her shoulders. And so we are either inspired probably first off by other artists that are in a similar genre to what we're interested in, and we find somebody like that really interesting. We find them compelling, whether it's music or painting or sculpting, whatever, or writing. But it is about finding, and this is what I can't stand about people are always like, you got to find your tribe, and I'm like, oh, you've ruined what is very you've to Peter's point, you've kind of commercialized and consumed a very deep and abiding spiritual human truth is you need a community that speaks into you life and correction. We see this with Paul when he talks about like the spiritual gifts. I've seen it embodied in several communities, and I won't name, but they're definitely not of the Western variety where someone comes in with stating their spiritual gift. And I've been in a few communities that are really good as like, well, we'll see, and you're invited to stay. You are a full member and stuff like that. But the community informs you on what it is, what is the role they see. And you may want to be, we'll just use a church community. You may want to be the preacher, but they're like, it's not your gift. And we can say like, well, I'm a preacher, I'm out, and a lot of people leave. Similar things happen with creativity. You can't have a community that obviously is going to take the air out of you. But you do have a community and other artists and other creatives and other students and other colleagues that challenge and push and be like, when you said that was actually really powerful. And from personal experience, or that was really interesting. You're like, fascinating. That's not a point I actually thought I would. That was kind of just something I got there to get to hear. And then you find out that that got to hear spot is actually kind of the beginning of your voice. So in a very non-individualistic way, I just kind of want to ask, in the realms of creativity, identity, faith, who are you to say who you are? That kind of a thing. Like, let the people that you get to know and trust and love speak into you, and they will introduce you to who you are in ways we can never get to on our own. And so, again, to make it more practical into this, to close off with, is this is something else we need to put back onto the university, is we have created an academic environment where isolation is almost, and I don't know if Dr. Birch or Dr. Witt can say this, but I remember our first week of class, and actually, Mr. Raj, I'm sure you've done training and schooling far surpassing anything, but I just remember in this sort of first day of classes, the professor there that tried to make us all, tough and sturdy and proud of what we're doing is like, he did the classic turn to your left, turn to your right. By the end of this, one of those people for sure won't be here. And, this is a program designed to weed you out. It's designed to put you through mental rigor. And it was very isolating. And to conclude, I had one friend who had a child at that time, a young child, and by the end of his PhD, every time his young son walked past a closed door, he said, "Hi, Dad," because he was so used to his dad coming home out and going into his office, closing the door and working. And he's like, if you don't think that makes you die a little bit inside, it's awful. I've been introduced to other pedagogical models where there is strength in a pedagogy of community and conversation. You're still responsible for the voice you're trying to come up with, but the idea of isolating it is seen as counter to genuine learning. You'll get your own ideas and whatnot, but then you've got to place them out. And I would make the argument, this goes all the way back to Aristotle, and this I will close with. As soon as you speak your idea out, it's no longer your idea. But it's going to be better because 4 or 5 other people are going to shape and shift and challenge and whatnot. So if you've got the humility to be like, okay, I'm presenting the seed of an idea to this community of people I trust, something new, powerful will grow and they will hand it back to you. That's more the sort of practical outworking way. Say community learning is probably the much better way to do what it is that we've been doing.
Thank you. I'll open it up to the other panelists if they have anything they want to add.
I would like if Dr. Birch said, "All wrong." That'd be amazing. She's like, you clearly do not understand pedagogy.
No, and I just really like how you're talking about creativity in terms of even the conversations we have throughout our day. Because when we speak out words into the world, we're creating, we're making. And I do think of creativity as more than just like making art, like music, drama, or dance, but just the act of like what you choose to wear in the morning is an act of making and creation. And then the food that you put together, and we are creating throughout our day. And I like how you talk about creativity in that broad way.
I think just to add a little bit there too with community, this is the way that a lot of AI experts are talking about how it can help education as well, like in how it can be very conversational, and especially if you're working with a system where it's more localized and you are giving it all the training from your own databases and things like this, where it can really help train you up in whatever field you're working in. Some of that can be part of this with kind of that, it's not human community, but there is kind of that dialogical way of coming to understanding that AI is going to frankly get better and better at doing. So it'll be interesting to see how we are. I think we're going to be forced to be able to figure out how to do education in this way, but it could open up some efficiencies, I think, there too, that might be helpful. So
yeah, I agree. And my only concern on that is when I think of community, I think of community of people that know you, and not a wide assortment of human knowledge, which each person's going to sort of embody, but people who are part of an actual embodied body that are invested in you in the way maybe more, I don't want to go overly biblical with Paul describe it, but people who know who I am are invested in me in their flawed ways and their bad advice and stuff like that. That's all sort of part and parcel with it. That's one thing is like when you can get in with some people that are really rooting you on and offering you challenges, I think that helps us grow on every level. So that's a good point for clarification. Thanks, Annie.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next question. For Mr. Raj, remembering Dr. Witt's story on AI faking a quote and what you mentioned about AI hallucinations, why is creativity inseparable from facts sometimes? Can you explain a bit more about what you do to combat this?
What was the part of the question? Why is creativity inseparable from facts?
Yeah.
Uh,
Why
got
is
it.
creativity inseparable from facts sometimes?
Right. I guess like when I shared that, I wasn't really saying creativity is inseparable from facts. What I was saying was when you separate creativity from facts, you create hallucinations, essentially. So you can actually separate it from facts. It's just not true. It makes up stuff. But yeah, creativity that is based on truth is actually harder. And actually that's what we seek. That's what all good creative output is about. Poems that talk about something that is real just more deeply than poems that talk about an incomprehensible or non-possible reality. We only find things beautiful and enjoy them when we can relate to them, and relating to them guarantees that they are true. So in that sense, yeah, like actually being creative and being connected to truth is much harder than creativity without any bounds. And so actually that work that I do in my team is extremely hard. It's one of the hardest things that we try to solve. To create something that can generate at the level of human beings, but still be rooted in fact it's extremely hard. And the way we do that is it's actually quite simple. It's asking again. We it's like you ask a question. It's very similar to a human interaction. You ask a question, somebody says something that does not make sense, and you say, you just said that. You just said so and so. Does that make sense? Is that right? And usually these things can listen to that and think about make a logical deduction that maybe what they said wasn't right, and rededuce the answer and correct it. Does that work all the time? No, but it's a pretty good way to do it. But that's just one approach. Lots of companies, lots of researchers do it in a different way. What's interesting is, and this goes back to community, one thing that researchers are finding, this is fairly new, like in the last 5-6 months, state-of-the-art researchers in AI development, what they're finding is it's actually better to make, instead of making one really big model, a model like, a multi-billion parameter model like ChatGPT and other ones that have come after that, they're discovering that it's actually better to have smaller models working together. So in a sense, a single AI is worse than a community of AIs. And that is being called agentic AI. And that's like the buzzword for this year. All the companies are wanting to create agentic AI, which is basically a set of AI agents that do what they want it to do. And we're finding that it's actually much better to do complex tasks which require reasoning and multi-hop processing using agents instead of a single AI. And agents actually do pretty well with hallucinations and other such problems that we've seen last few years.
Thank you. Just to be respectful of everyone's time, we're going to move on into the last question here. For Dr. Birch, how do we do proper scholarship without the struggle of synthesizing ideas over time and coming to conclusions through this difficult endeavor?
Thank you. Can you read it one more time, Selwyn?
Yes. How do we do proper scholarship without the struggle of synthesizing ideas over time and coming to conclusions through this difficult endeavor?
So this question sounds to me like it's about the productive struggle, which is a very key part of learning. And I would say it still has to be a really key part of learning. So while I have used AI to expedite the communication of my research, I have not used it to, quickly conduct research or very quickly come to conclusions or, now, having said that, I did write a chapter with Blair Pike where we used AI as a tool to do some qualitative analysis of transcripts because we asked AI to then in all the participant transcripts, and it could very quickly find all the emotion words and list them. And so that was a tool that we came quickly to just pull out data, but then we still did the work of, discussing those emotion words, like putting them into categories, talking together about how they were meaningful and how they connected back to the research question. So, but I think, the fact that we could use AI to pull out the emotion words gave us more time to actually have the conversation and engage in the deep and important work instead of having to take time. Okay, you read half of these, and I'm going to read half of these. It'll take a day, and we will manually pull out, and then we've only have an hour to meet. Whereas we got 3 hours just to have the conversation. So I like the question if it's talking about struggling, wrestling, sitting with ideas over time, because I think that's something that AI tools can enable us to do by freeing up time for us to do that really important work.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. We're kind of out of time here with our event. So yeah, if you'd all join me in giving a thank you to the panelists with a round of applause. Thank you to Dr. Witt, Dr. Birch, Dr. Robertson, and Mr. Raj for coming out and doing this. We really appreciate it on behalf of the Sophia Society and those here at Tyndale. We encourage you guys check out Sophia Society on YouTube, on Instagram, or on most of the social medias and stuff. And if you'd like to receive a newsletter, you can check, just let us know in the chat, or you can come talk to one of us back at the kiosk at the back. Thank you again, everyone. And have a wonderful night.